I know my audience is tired of me talking about the buttons I'm pushing, but it is what it is for a low-tech guy like myself. I think I've got everything going right. I probably shouldn't even say that because no, I don't believe in jinxing things. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Louis B. Free Radio Show, Brain Food from the Heartland. I am honored to have returning to the show this morning, Attorney Lawrence Altman. Good morning to you. Welcome back.
Good morning, Louis. How are you?
I'm well. I'm always well when I'm talking with you.
I feel the same. It's an honor and privilege to talk to you and your listeners.
Honor for me. It's an honor for me. And you are live tell us where you're at.
Well, I am broadcasting from Revo Cup Coffee Shop in Town Center Plaza, Overland Park, Kansas. The best coffee in the world. Owners Brandon and Marve have been kind enough to let me use their office, and their two great baristas, Sarah and Lala, between all four of them, they make the best coffee in the world. So I'm talking from here.
I've got to ask you, what are you having? What I know
I have a latte. They know that in the warm weather, it's an iced latte. And then when it's cold, it's a hot latte. I'm easy. As soon as I walk in, they're making the drink.
They know. So what's the weather today there?
Today is warm, so it's an iced latte. I refuse to give in until the first freeze.
I hear you. Believe me, I hear you. A little bit about your background, if you would.
All right. I am currently an adjunct professor at Avila University in Kansas City, Missouri. I have taught graduate education classes regarding special education. And currently I am teaching an undergraduate class of business for the business school, where we talk about anti-discrimination and civil rights. My background is a retired attorney. The area that I spent the most time with is working with students with disabilities. My last day job, I'm from St. Louis originally. I moved to Kansas City, Missouri 11 years ago to take a job at the Kansas City, Missouri Public School District. I was their lead compliance officer for special education and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. I also was the Title IX coordinator and helped, along with some great teammates, put together some anti-bullying materials and helping students with mental health issues.
That's wonderful. And your book, of course, Bully Navigator, can take a minute and talk about that. I love the book.
Sure. This is the second book I published along with my good friend Steve Cohen. It contains chapters. The concern that he and I both have is that sexual harassment and bullying have no place in the schools at all. And so we collaborated to write this book with various chapters. I expanded some of the sections from our first book, because by the time the second book came out, the rules regarding Title IX and sexual harassment had changed. They've changed again just a month and a half ago. So the chapter I've got there isn't even current. I'd have to update that again. And I've got that material out in the public sector. And then with COVID, we talked about that a little bit in the book, but there's been more cases and federal directives on that as well. So the book discusses some of those. And one of the chapters in that book discusses improving school safety in light of all the shootings we've had around the United States.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Obviously, everybody's horrified, right? And it's something that shouldn't be at all, or certainly, see, I hate even saying this, extremely rare seems to be. Larry, I'm sorry, Attorney Altman, I almost feel.
No, it's Larry.
Yeah, but off air we can do that, but on air I want to be respectful, and I want people to know you're an attorney. It shouldn't exist at all, and I hate saying that it. I don't know if people are becoming numb to it. If it's too, I hate using the word common. What's going on? What's going on?
Well, I think your point is well taken. The paper that I shared with you, Louis, and that has not been published discusses that very point. We have become numb to it. The response to shootings, and it's not just shootings, it's knifing and killings as well, is that the thoughts and prayers are sent out. And then the next step, most common, is, well, we need to improve our lockdowns. We need to improve the kids getting into a room that's safe, and harden our schools. And I have a grandson who's starting first grade, and good Lord, he knows more about lockdowns than I ever knew. And that's just the wrong approach, in my opinion. And not that that isn't important, but I'm one of these, and it's the same approach that I took when we were at Kansas City, Missouri Public Schools, and what I teach my students. Why don't we be, instead of reactive, why don't we be preventative?
Yes.
And I understand that the hot topic button is gun control, and I don't want to even go down that rabbit hole with your audience. But in 2018, and this is part of my book, the United States Secret Service recognized that they didn't want to talk about guns in the school. Rather, what they wanted to talk about was a proactive approach for schools to take that might prevent not just shootings, but also student suicides and self-harm.
A little bit more about that. Again, proactive.
All right,
self-harm.
so let's take what we've seen here recently. It just, and you probably haven't heard much about it. In the last 10 days, second day of school in Oakland, California, a student killed another one with a knife.
Oh.
Late
I didn't
last
hear
week.
about that. I did.
Well, because it's too common. It was only one.
Yeah,
See, there's only one child died.
Yeah.
Wasn't 18 or 20. Late last week in either South or North Carolina, and I may have this confused, a student was killed by a knife in a fight at school. Again, no publicity, but because it was only one, what's the big deal? Yet what I'm seeing now is that there are some articles coming out recognizing the crisis finally. And one article that I read maybe last week that said that we have had more school violence actions in the last 2 years than we had in the last 20 years. So it's there. So the proactive response from the United States Secret Service is that why don't we figure out a methodology that we could devise that might identify children that are in crisis, that if we got to them early enough and worked collaboratively with community leaders, we could provide some help and assistance for this child to prevent the violence from outbreaking, the child from hurting themselves or committing suicide. And that was the purpose of their 2018 and 19 publications. And they laid out 8 points of what to use. Not surprisingly, the number one cause of school violence is bullying. Yeah. And we've known that since 2011. And yet we're still having, I just got off, I use a research tool. And again, I read 2 more bullying cases today where the schools sort of shrug their shoulders at it. And so if we know these things ahead of time, why can't we take steps to prevent the ultimate outcome? That was the Secret Service's proposition. Finally, we're getting some national publicity on it. Time magazine had an article about 2 or 3 months ago about violence in schools, and lo and behold, there was 2 pages that talked about why don't we do a preventative method of making sure we stop it before it happens. And how they discussed it was this is like a balloon that's ready to burst, and instead of letting it pop, why don't we let some air out of it first and see how that helps. Some organizations that I have worked with in the past are now having seminars discussing preventative methods to help schools prevent the outcome before it starts. But we're late in the game, Louis. We're late. I've been advocating this since 2018. I'm not the only one, but I mean, I'm trying to figure out to myself how I can't possibly have been the only person to have known this for 4 or 5 years.
And then you wonder, like you say, you wonder why. Actually, I was just talking with a friend of mine very early this morning, and he wanted to know, what I was doing on the show today. And I told him about you, and we got into a big discussion about bullying. And he's a bit younger, not substantially younger. Yeah, he is. In case he's listening, he's younger, but he's not like a young adult or a young kid. We're talking about how it was years ago, and I certainly remember bullying when I was young. Today, it's at an entirely different level. We can get into the whole social media thing, et cetera. But he and I were wondering, why hasn't more been done? This is not a new phenomenon. It may it's, as you know better than I, different forms nowadays. But why hasn't it been addressed? Go ahead.
Well, in 2011, the understanding how the federal Department of Education works a little bit is that there are certain areas of education that they can intervene with that allows them to publish documents that schools need to follow their regulations. One of those is the area of Title IX sexual harassment. And the reason they can be involved in that is that the deal is that if you take federal funds, whether you're a K through 12 school or a college university, you have to comply with Title IX. The other area is not an educational act, but it's an anti-discrimination law akin to the American Disabilities Act called Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, that says that if students have certain types of disabilities and they don't need to be education, schools have to provide reasonable accommodations for that child. Now, same rule. You don't have to follow 504. You don't have to follow Title IX. But if you want to take the federal bucks, you got to follow their rules. So in 2011, recognizing we had a problem in the area of disability, the Department of Education said, look, if a disabled student is bullied for any reason, related in that stage, it was related to their disability, you must investigate and take steps. They expanded that to say if a disabled student is bullied for any reason, you have to take steps to not only investigate, prevent it from happening again, and do some training. That last phrase is training. 2014, we also at the same time in 2014, the Department of Education and the then president recognized we had a national crisis in our hands in sexual harassment. And so same rules started applying, that if you have this issue, you got to take steps, etc. As COVID came along and more data was coming out, we also recognized, this is not Larry Altman, this is research, that if you were a student of color, you seem to be treated differently in the area of discipline when it came to anything, and that this was making the problems worse. Then we have COVID come along, and it made the problem, that, especially if you were a student of Asian descent, with the words going out that this was the Chinese flu, this was the Chinese bug, that they became targets, etc. And so when you add the social factors on, of stress, pressure from peers that are unacceptable, the data again continues to come out. It gets worse and worse and worse. And again, the trick comes down to it's prevention. And my experience was, and when we started working very hard at preventive tools at KCPS, that we found that we reduced the incidence and improved educational outcomes.
Talk about some of those tools.
Well, one of the things we did is we had great support from the superintendent of the school then, Stephen Green, is that in 2014, when the new Title IX regs were published, we wrote policy protocols and procedures that basically adopted everything that they put into their requirements. The next part of the operation then was how would we make certain that we complied, and one of those things we had to do was to improve our reporting tools so that that if something came up, it could hit my desk. Avoid going to the principal.
Okay.
Come to me and my team is what it comes down to. So you had Steve Cohen here with me the last time. His son developed an incredible software tool that we used in our schools, that every person who worked there had an icon that I think school safety, I forget what it was called. You punched that button, a one-page report came up. You filled out the report, hit send. That document hit I had a specific email address for that. It hit my desk. And then once I opened it, it opened up a series of things, including timelines for us to conduct various things to do in a timely and efficient manner to make sure, A, investigate, B, if we found a problem, take care of it. And then the third component was to train, including the victim and the perpetrator, so that it would not happen again. But we also added on a component, because it was required then, is that we did training prior to the school year on bullying, sexual harassment of all of our students and staff, so that they understood that we weren't fooling around here, that we were going to take this thing seriously. This was the end of it. And once we investigated, we'd enter a decision. You could appeal that to the superintendent. We were done. The critical component was collecting, the other part of that is collecting data to see if it works. And lo and behold, here I'm reading before I come onto your show today, Louis, And there are 2 school districts around the country that put these plans in, and nobody knew if it was doing any good because nobody bothered to collect and look at data. So when I go to my students, guess what? They're taught that. Whether it be in my business class or my education classes, they're taught how to not only implement, but collect and review, because the question that I asked all of my students, how do you know it works?
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. And again, the data showed that once we got into full speed, because parents and students knew we were dead serious about this, that the incidents reduced, educational outcomes improved. Not surprising, because we've had 2 Secretary of Educations in a row have said, if you do these things, you're going to have better outcomes in your education because kids aren't going to be looking over their shoulders.
One of the things that you write about in your piece about, again, defining the prohibited and concerning behaviors, because what one person may perceive to be bullying, someone else doesn't. Someone might think something is serious. You've got to define them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we would use a flow chart, and it may even be in the book of several steps that took place of when it would reach the bullying aspect. But the first consideration was, and this is why you need to have assessment teams. What we told parents, students, and staff is that just report the incident to me. I don't want them to have to make that call. So here's what we did. And there's nothing that was written about this. It's just something that we sat through as a team and figured out was the best way to do it. 3 people looked at that report that came to my desk: myself, an assistant superintendent who was in charge of student affairs, and the principal of the building where the incident emanated from. Our rule was that if any one of the 3 of us said it required investigation, that was it. Only took a vote of 1.
Yeah.
Part 2, if we ever all 3 agreed it didn't, but a parent wanted it investigated, even though it was a 3-0, we didn't think it needed to be investigated, we investigated without question. We aren't going to doubt the parents. Let's put the parents' mind at ease. We also had specific categories that we were going to investigate. If it was a disabled student, we were required by the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education. There was no question about that. We had to investigate. If it was an act of what we call, if it was a repeat offender, because what Steve's system allowed us to do is, although every student was identified by ID number, the system tracked those reports. So let's say today I got a report on student number 12 and we found no problem. 3 months later, student number 12 shows up again with somebody else in a similar incident. We investigated that. Wait a minute, where there's smoke, there's fire. But these were internal rules that we developed. And I'm not saying it's not written down anywhere. It's just what we as a team decided was best. And I have, again, if someone were to ask me, how would I do it? I'm not saying it's easy. Let me start that right now. It's not easy, but you have to have a methodology, what we call, you have to have protocols and procedures, and you have to implement them every single time without fail.
Attorney Altman, I'm looking at a couple of emails, and I know you address this in the book and the Secret Service article about school safety, but people want to know, what's the profile of a school shooter?
There is none.
You're right.
That's exactly what they said. We don't know what they look like. We cannot go up and say, well, always be this student. Instead, what we know is that there are characteristics that we have to look for. Students who are victimized or are the bully is one of those triggering points that you look at. Students who have had a traumatic event in their life. Let's take the example where in COVID, they've lost somebody close to them or haven't even been in school. That's a stressor. Third, we start seeing grades dropping off, something we haven't seen before from a student. 4, we might see behaviors we've never seen before. Student having to run out of the classroom that we've never seen before, starts crying, has lost friends. There is not one specific item. This is why you need an assessment team and you need training that has to be put into place. And I'll take it a step further. 2 months ago, the Department of Education is greatly concerned about the overuse and inappropriate use of discipline against disabled students. In one of their articles, they talk about preventive materials that can be implemented and lay it out that if schools would do these things before it got down to that escalation point, their data says we stop it before it goes too far. We improve everything. The problem is, Louis, it's not easy. Number one, schools are already overwhelmed. This is where you have to have community help. Two examples I will give of how I'm just so appreciative. Kansas City, Missouri Public Schools, when we got into the mental health side of the situation, we reached out to one of our local hospitals, Children's Mercy, because we were concerned about the suicides at that time were #2 cause of death. It's now #1, by the way, of adolescents. We couldn't do this on our own, and we're not healthcare providers. At no cost to us, Children's Mercy sent their staff to our teams, and we developed first a reporting method, 2, an assessment document, and 3, made it known that we should then encourage parents to contact Children's Mercy. It's an inner city school. They would work within the confines of whatever their reimbursement was under Medicaid or whatever the parents were getting, and charge them no more for the mental health services. So now, how do we know this works? In the first year of our program, our superintendent received 2 letters from different doctors and said that because we had taken the steps we had taken, we had saved 2 children's lives.
Wow.
What's that worth? Now, could we have done that on our own? No. But Children's Mercy stepped in. Now I'm going to go back to my former hometown, St. Louis, and one of my alma maters, Washington University, one of the great Midwest universities. It's where I have one of my other degrees. The high school that I actually graduated from in 1969 was having terrible problems in behavior issues. The teachers were complaining they never saw the eyes of their children. They were always looking down, looking over their shoulder. Somebody gave a thought to contact Washington University, who said, of course, we're going to help, and sent over a couple of professors from one of their departments who did an assessment, worked with Hopkins at no cost to the school to implement a plan, helped them monitor the plan. And then in the publication 1 year later, teachers are reporting, these are the first time we've seen our students' eyes. Educational outcomes significantly improved because Washington University, who has unlimited funding, never sent them a bill. They only had to be asked, and they stepped in and did what a civic citizen should do. And that's, by the way, what the government of the Department of Education, whether you like them or not, that's one of the things they advocate. This is not, we're all in this together, folks.
We sure are. I'm talking with attorney Lawrence Altman. You're listening to Louis B. Free Radio Show, Brain Food from the Heartland, talking about school safety, et cetera. A couple of other emails, here's one. How does it get started? How do I start something like this in my community? Any thoughts?
You're going to have to, you're going to have parents, you're going to have to unite and go to the school boards and demand not just more police, but demand that they at least read something that the United States Secret Service published in 2018 and 19. Now, they're going to say we don't know how to find that. That's a bad excuse. It can be found. Their lawyers are in these school districts, and these lawyers can find, these publications aren't kept hidden. They can pop in the United States Secret Service 2018 publication and find it. They're online, they're free. The government wants you to see them, but you're going to have to push the school, because the school's going to come back saying, well, it's too expensive. It's this, and this. I got it. But let me ask this of schools. This is a rhetorical answer. When there's a school tragedy, as we had in Uvalde, what do you hear? How the school has to brings in psychiatrists, mental health providers, go down the line with that. What's the cost of that? Now, let's compare that if they had put in preventative measures beforehand and there's no Uvalde. I wonder how you would compare the cost, the short-term cost, I got to believe is cheaper. And number two, instead of having an entire school district whose students might have mental health issues for the rest of their lives, because you don't have the problem. So, and then I'll take it back to the 2 students. We got letters about it. Kansas City Public Schools. Somebody want to tell me how much of a dollar number would you put on the lives of those 2 children? Somebody tell me what that was. Ask those parents. Turns out we didn't pay anything for that because of our corporate helper. But even if we paid $10,000 for the assistance, was that worth the child's life that we saved, or the 2 children's lives that were saved? I think the answer to that is yes.
I agree with you absolutely. And again, your chapter 15 in the book, Bully Navigator, again, is a summation of the United States Secret Service's guide for preventing school violence. People have to become proactive. Again, because of my age, obviously I'm not involved with the schools locally in the area, but we would think with everything that's gone on, they would be more, boards would be, and I don't want to judge all boards. I'm sure there's some that are very receptive. I just think, I would like to think that boards would be, no, you're shaking your
No,
you're
because
shaking your head.
after the Michigan and Uvalde shooting, I had discussions with local representatives in this area. Some of them had children. We had a couple of school situations in the last several months. I talked to them about this. Their answer is, well, we got other things to do.
Oh.
Really? And
Oh.
I'm sorry, I'm mad at it. You got something more important than this? Tell me what it is. Well, I know it's getting reelected. All right, I got that.
Yeah.
And it's not, and I guess it's not what, fancy enough. I guess because I don't have a good answer for that. I've tried to get invited to school meetings. I'm not nationally known. I'm not even that well known in my community. But I've offered to come speak to school boards. Nobody has invited me. That's why I'm so grateful to you, Louis, and to allow me to speak about this day. My wife, look, if I don't know if I've told you this, my wife and I are going to be married 49 years this December.
Well, congratulations.
If I've done any good in this world, it's because of my wife, Gail. I am dead serious about that. Gail and I are dedicated to children, and it breaks our heart when we read or see another child has been hurt at school. And now we've got a child in a public school, first grader, and there isn't a day that doesn't go by that I go, oh my God, is he going to get home today? Now that may sound crude, but I don't know that now. I just want people to listen. If you don't want to act, that's your business. So when you give me this privilege to speak out, it's outstanding for me. I mean, it really warms the heart of myself and my wife, Gail.
No, the honor is mine, because again, this has to get out. This message has to get out. And it's disappointing to hear that even in the communities that people aren't reaching out. People need to reach out. And by the way, we've got links up to bullynavigator.com also. I just think the resources, what you could provide for people, and to give them like a plan of what to do. Like you said, reaching out to universities, reaching out to hospitals in the area.
Yeah, there are sources out there. And as I said, the book has a chapter, and I'm not asking people to buy the book, but there is another.
I am.
There is an organization of lawyers that out of New York that has published one of my papers, but I've got 2 papers sitting in the still in right now that no one wants to publish. One of them might be this fall, and I shared those 2 with you, updates. And again, the explanation of one of them was, and I'm very disappointed by my own Missouri bar, even though I live in Kansas. I remember the reason the Missouri Bar Journal won't publish it is, quote, it's not a legal document. It doesn't have anything to do with the law.
Oh.
Yet, and they're right, it doesn't. But so so they're not real happy with me right now because I've spoken out about this. But for example, they did publish an article about how many times Babe Ruth appeared in litigation.
Oh.
And they thought that was more important. And the explanation I gave them, I said, it may not. I said, so if I put in there something that said that there could be legal liability if you don't do this, you might have published it. I said, by the way, how many of our lawyers have families, children, grandchildren that might want to know about this? Put it someplace for good. No, we can't. And the American Bar Journal I've tried to get them to publish it. They gave me one of the sections, never heard back from them. And it's because I'm not known. I'm just this little old Midwestern lawyer.
Yeah, but read the content. I mean, when you say they can't, I'll say they won't. They won't publish. What are they going to do after and again, I hate to say this, after, what's it going to take? I don't even want to say after that. What is it going to take for them to wake up and publish and get this information out? I just think that's, when you talk about like bar associate, you would think that, those are human beings there. You would think they would see the value of it. The Babe Ruth thing just freaks me out. They'll do that.
And as I said, when we take an oath, we're also counselors. It doesn't say we just practice law. The oath in Missouri is that we also counsel people. Well, if some parent came into my office today, if I was still actively practicing and said, oh my God, we had a school, this, thank God nobody got hurt. Larry, is there something we can do? I'd say, well, why don't we talk about going over together and sharing this information with the school as your counselor, as your attorney? That's my job, for goodness sake. Why do I talk to these things about my students? Because they need to hear this. First day of class, we were talking about the new Title IX regulations, and I made it very clear because it's part of the new regs, and AVLA is great at this. They really enforce this. I said to my students, if you feel like you are afraid to go and report something, I will go with you. I will help you go over there. I can't help you. That's not my job. We have a Title IX committee for that. But if you're afraid to go by yourself, I will make time to go with you and help you to that office to make your report. That's my job. That's what I'm supposed to do.
It's, again, and I appreciate you crediting your wife, and I'm sure you're very accurate with that. But where do you think it comes from in Larry Altman to do? Again, I say this with respect and admiration. This isn't an economic thing for you.
No, it's not. It's
certainly, be comfortable.
So going back is that I hated being a lawyer. And when I was 50, my wife was retiring from special education. And she said, I think you're going to enjoy this field. And I fell in love with it. But what really opened my eyes to this was when I moved and worked for an inner city school for 5+ years. And although I've read about poverty, I read about race discrimination, I could see it with my own eyes. And right then and there, any doubt I had left was over. Something has to be done to advocate, not for these children only, but for all children. And then having grandchildren puts it over the top. What drives me in my faith, I'm Jewish, is that we're supposed to leave things better than when we came into the world. And my feeling is that I've got to help children. They're the legacy. They're the next group that have to take over the mess that we left them. And we've left them a mess. Yeah. So that's what drives me every day.
And I dare say getting worse in most cases. Things, again, not to get into to get into some of the educational aspect, the reports that are coming out about how far behind kids are in some schools. I know a teacher in this area that teaches, I think, 3rd and 4th grade. She tells me that some of them are reading at the kindergarten level. And I
read that article in Time magazine this week. Same thing.
Yeah, and she had told me this personally a while back, and she said that the school, I want to make sure I say this, doesn't, I don't want to say forces them to pass the kids, but I'm going to say forces them to pass the kids. They can't, which is horrific. She also talks about the violence at that age, and she was telling me about a 4th grader that shoulder blocked her, a 4th grader that kind of ran, I guess, kind of run the shoulder into her aggressively. And again, what are we doing? How is this continuing?
Well, if I had the answer in the magic wand, yeah, I would shake it, and I don't. But we're in a teacher crisis now, and I'm sure, Louis, you're reading the same thing I am. Teachers are leaving right and left because of those kinds of things. Because we've asked them to do too much that parents should be doing. I will say that parents have responsibility in this as well. But again, I'll come back that if we collaborate with parents, with school people, with our community leaders, with our business leaders, as is being advocated by the Surgeon General of the United States, especially in the area of mental health, whether you like him or not. is that this is something he recognizes needs to be done. We're in a new era. Look, when you and I came up, we had a transistor radio with a battery on it,
Yeah.
and a black and white television set. The
That went off at like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning.
The newspapers were the source of our information, but that's not today. We're in a new world, and we haven't. I guess, for what little I know, I guess we haven't. Our intellect hasn't caught up with our visual things that are promoting us. Kids can see stuff on the internet they never could see. How many times have you seen when you're at a restaurant, how do parents entertain their children, keep them quiet? They got a phone in front of them watching a cartoon instead of talking to them. Shall I go on?
Yeah, I certainly agree with you when you say that about things having and the teacher crisis, et cetera. When you mentioned that very briefly, I'll tell you, regular audience knows where I'm going to go with this, but I remember picking up takeout. This is a few years back, a while back, and I'm watching a couple sit across from each other, young couple, maybe 30s, early 30s, and they're eating with one hand, they've got the phone up in the other. I went home that night and took the food home and told my wife, I said, I really wanted to go over there and gently, of course, not aggressively, put my hands on their phone and kind of put it down and say, look, there's a person across from you. If you want to do that, that's cool. Get takeout and go home. And then you can be barefoot on the couch and do whatever. Of course, my wife's response was, I'm glad you didn't do that because I don't know how I'd get you bailed out of jail for assault. Okay, it's just, and then you see the younger ones with that. And like you said earlier about the teachers not seeing their eyes. I mean, it's so multifaceted. And again, I love your drive to get this information out there, but people their communities, they've got to get proactive.
Yes.
Very proactive.
Absolutely.
That's Secret Service. And again, I've got what you sent me. That's out there. It's free.
They want you to read it. And when I tell my students, when I share stuff with them published by federal agencies, I said, the language is not written for lawyers. They write it so that people can read it and understand it. Now what they'll tell you is they write it at a 7th grade level. I know what they're doing with good reason.
Sure.
Look, if I want to know what the law is, I'll go look at what a judge says. But when they put these documents out there for aids or guidelines, they put it in plain English so everybody can understand it. With that are the technical regulations that are written in all this legalese garbage. But the public, and what I share with my students, is not the actual regulations. I bring in the 1 or 2 page or 4 pager from the agency, and I said, look at this. You guys can read and understand this. It's written so that we all can understand it. I don't have to explain legal terms in here. Yeah. It's there, it's free, and the government wants you to read it.
Yeah, and the documents that you sent me, again, I can read it and understand it.
Right, and what I write now is I write for my audience. And so when I write a legal document, yes, it has some legal stuff in it. But when I write for general audiences, and I think some of the things or the book, yeah, I'll talk about the citation from the United States Secret Service because I have to do that. They wrote it, I didn't. But after that, I want people to be able to read it and say, I can digest this. I get it. And that's the mission. If I wanted to write a thesis for a PhD, it wouldn't look like that. I got that. That's what I have my son Mike do. But he's the PhD, not me. I'm not, I want everybody else. And it's not like I'm claiming that they're not intellectual. That's not what I'm saying. Lawyers write in this mystical world. Yeah. Because they've been taught that way. And yet sometimes we have to recognize that when we're communicating with non-lawyers, let's go back and use, as they would say in England, the Queen's English.
Yes. Yeah. No, you're right. And you do that beautifully writing for your audience.
Thank you.
Bullynavigator.com, bullynavigator.com. I highly recommend. I think everybody needs to, because everybody knows somebody that this is going to be affected. And bullynavigator.com is an incredible book. Attorney Lawrence Altman has been my guest. And Larry, I want to continue this discussion because I'm looking at emails that I've got, questions that I've got, but I would love to, if you're up for it. This is such an important discussion. So if you're in, I'd like to continue this with you.
whenever you tell me look, Louis, what can I help you and your audience with? That's my answer. If it helps children, I'm in. Absolutely.
I know that about you. You've got an incredible heart, and the Tikkun Olam, trying to leave the world a better place. I love that also. Larry, thank you so much.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you and your audience. And please, if you want me back, we'll get it done.
I do. We'll schedule. I'm serious. I'd
Thanks,
love to
my
do it in
friend.
the next few weeks, if you will.
You're the best, my friend.
No,
Thank you
you're
so
the
much.
best, Larry. You're the best. This is about you, my friend. This is all about you. I just love this guy. Again, bullynavigator.com. It's bullynavigator.com. The